What's up, knitters? This is Jana from Purl Together. Today's video is going to be a Q&A. So a couple weeks ago, I asked for questions and comments on the YouTube channel in the community tab, and then also on in the Purl Together Facebook group. And so I just wanted to know if you had any questions for me about specific things you're working on or whatever you want to talk about. I want to pause for just a moment and express my gratitude to my patrons. These are people that support my channel by pledging a small amount each month to keep these videos coming to you each and every week. And in trade for doing so, I offer patron-only knit night, a special Purl Together patron-only Facebook group, patron-only videos. So if you want to check that out, go to patreon.com/Purl Together. Links to everything is down below. And we'll start with Teresa Daniel. She asks, is there a way to keep good tension between knitting and purl stitches? So she did a baby blanket apparently that had like a basket weave pattern, and she had some issues with, there being a gap between switching between those two types of stitches. Now, normally the gap occurs when you're going from a purl to a knit, but sometimes the other way around also. So what I found is when you switch from one type of stitch to another, the best way to mitigate any kind of gap and kind of tighten that up is to not only give that first stitch a good tug, but also the second one. So if you're doing a knit 2, purl 2, give the second one a good little tug, as well as, the second purl, the second purl in your sequence, as well as the second knit. And that might help a little bit. Ultimately, it's just practice and getting used to that tension and the switching back and forth. It's practice. Okay. So the next question I have is from Cassandra. What kind of recommendations or sites are there for stretching out muscles and tendons in the hands of a knitter or crocheter? And how important are these groups of tissues to be kept flexible? As with any potential repetitive stress injury, stretching is always good. The stretching this way and that way. And there are specific exercises you can do. I'll put a link below to a book about ergonomic knitting by Carson Demers. He's had several interviews with various podcasters and other knitters, and he's pretty well known. I think he's a physical therapist, or he has some ties to that community. Anyway, I'll put a link down below for his book. You might look for that. And yes, it's important to definitely keep limber and stretched. So then Heather asks, when doing cables, what is the right tension? I can't figure out whether to knit them slightly more loosely or slightly more tightly so they don't spread out, or more loosely so that they relax, versus knitting other stitches. Again, that's a matter of practice. I think when I do a 2/2 cable, for example, I think I kind of do it automatically. But I think when I knit, after I cross over and I'm knitting the stitches off the cable needle, I think I actually have gotten in the habit of pulling, I wrap the stitch whichever way I'm going, and I think I do that a little bit more loosely, or pull a little bit more yarn through the loop as I'm knitting it, so that it evens out a little bit. Now, again, it's kind of boils down to practice, in my opinion. So I know that's not super specific, but practice. And obviously a cable that is a bigger cable that's like 4/4 or even 6/6, as opposed to just a 2/2, that's going to become more of an issue. The more stitches are involved, you might want to loosen that up a little bit. Okay. Heather says also, do you have any instructions on icord or other finishing techniques? During our last knit along that we just finished up, the Cosy Winter Shawl, we did do an icord bind off, and that was pretty cool. So you can look on that playlist on the YouTube channel for number 3 of the Cosy Winter Shawl part 3 knit along, and that shows that technique. As we go along and we do tutorials, there'll be other things that come up, I'm sure, and I may actually do some separate videos in a playlist about finishing. So as the channel grows, I will segregate things like that out, and it'll become more of a complete library. Okay, Gail says, I use your method for toe-up socks. How about adding to it for knee socks? These pattern yards would be so cool for my granddaughter. Okay, so she wants to know how to increase for the calf if you were making full-length knee socks. So what I would do is measure around the ankle, and then I would measure the widest part of the calf to see how many stitches you might need depending on your gauge. So again, here's where swatching becomes important. You need to know how many stitches per inch that you knit so that you know the difference between the ankle and then the widest part of the calf, so that you know how many stitches you're going to need to increase to accommodate that. Ribbing is also helpful because it's super stretchy and can hug, the contours of your leg. So again, I would swatch and then I would just figure out how you need to do those increases, and I would probably gradually space those out. I've never knitted knee socks, disclaimer there. Okay, hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, Jenny says, does it matter what kind of a cast on method you use for a project? And what is a cable cast on? A cable cast on is simply when you're come to the end of your piece and you need to add some more stitches. So I did a shawl about a year ago where I had finished, it was a half circle shawl, and I had finished the shawl at the bottom, but I needed to cast on, I think it was, I want to say another 20 some odd stitches. So I had the shawl, let's use my coaster. So I had this shawl and it was a half circle like this, and I wanted to cast on stitches that came out from here. And then instead of knitting the shawl back and forth like this, I actually cast on a bunch of stitches that came out this way. And then I started knitting back and forth to add a border. So I was knitting perpendicularly to the bottom edge of my shawl. So I needed that cable cast on to add about 14 or 20, I forget how many it was, how many stitches to go out, and then start knitting like this to add this border and attach that perpendicularly all the way around. So a cable cast on is more sturdy, in my opinion, to add stitches on a sleeve hole or on the bottom of a shawl like that, anywhere you just need to add some stitches to an existing garment or existing piece. Okay, so the reason it matters what kind of cast on you do, some cast ons are more stretchy than others. Some cast-ons look differently than others. Some of it's personal preference, but some of it's function, and some of that's just practice also. I use a long tail cast-on, honestly, for like 95% of everything I do, but that's just my personal preference. And again, disclaimer, in truth, I have not tried. I have not experimented with a whole bunch of other different cast-ons. That's also on my bucket list. So there's tons to learn. Okay, Cassandra has another question. Okay, when knitting a German short row for toe-up socks, the pattern indicates the length of the instep and the foot before working the heel. What is the length or mathematical solution when incorporating Cat Bordhi's sweet tomato heel in a toe-up sock? Okay, what I will say about that is Cat Bordhi has a whole entire method and how you can determine this. And if you go to her website, catbordhi.com, put the link down below, she explains that all. She has several ebooks that I will plug as well. So she has several ebooks that are different patterns that incorporate the sweet tomato heel. And so look for that. And as far as a mathematical solution, I would suggest that you check out her patterns for that. So check out her website. I'll put a link down below. Okay, Helen wants to know, can you please talk about yarn? What is good for what? What about yarn bases? What makes loft, drape, etc.? Okay. We could go talk for days about different kinds of yarn. I don't even know where to start with that question, honestly. How I choose yarn for any given project, it's so subjective. It depends. For me, it's a lot about just how it feels and how wonderful it is to knit with and how squishy it is. I mean, this stuff back here that I'm doing the block of the month with the Afghan, it's such a joy to knit with. It has fantastic stitch definition because it's merino, which is a wool from the merino sheep. And it's highly twisted. It's twisted tightly, so it has really good stitch definition. And so it has so many plies. Whereas if you have a single ply yarn, that's just one yarn that's twisted instead of 2 or 3 strands that are twisted and then twisted together. So the type of yarn that you choose depends on the feel. It depends on the washability. It depends on how it's going to drape. Depends on the needle size also that you use in combination with whatever yarn you're choosing. Something that is like a linen and cotton combination is not going to have a lot of spring or a lot of memory or a lot of springiness, I guess, for lack of, not very good with the adjectives. I'm sure there's some kind of official term for that. But it's, when you knit a cotton dishcloth, it doesn't have a lot of memory. It will stretch out and it will stay stretched out until you wash it again. So The yarn that you choose for any given project really depends on what it is you're knitting, how you want it to feel, the pairing with the needles. It's just, there's just endless combinations. You know, does this thing need to be washed or does it not? So again, there's so many different types of fibers, whether you're talking about an animal fiber, plant fiber like cotton, bamboo, or whether you're talking about, you know, different kinds of wool have different properties. For example, when I had sheep, Icelandic wool is straight off the sheep is much more scritchy and rough. I wouldn't want to make something that went around my face or touched my neck or touched my skin. But on the other hand, merino is soft, and Tunis, other different kinds of breeds of sheep are very soft. But commercially prepared wool, you know, there's additives and there's things they use when they wash the wool and when they prepare it. It's endless. So, but I would start with going with what you know is the correct size and needle combination. Is it washable? Is it not washable? Do you need it to be washable? Do you need it to have memory? And then go with what you like the feel of. Roxanne says, when working in the round knitting stripes, I'm unhappy with carrying the second yarn up to the next stripe. It just doesn't look smooth. Right, you have a jog. And the reason is when we knit, we're not knitting round and round perfectly. We're actually knitting in a spiral. Okay, so when you knit in a spiral and then you change colors, you need to do what's called a jogless join. And I have yet to do a video on that, but there are several on YouTube. You can search YouTube for jogless join. There's several different techniques for that. And depending on what colors you're using and how often you're changing colors, you know, some of those techniques work better than others. You need to, I would pop over to Suzanne Bryan's channel. She does a really good job of explaining how to mitigate that. So check those out. Let's see. Okay, Kirby says, your Cosy Winter Shawl looks so deliciously squishy. And I have one question. What is the garter stitch gauge for this? Okay, so she recently started checking gauge, doesn't know how I usually knit. Here's the thing. I don't know what the garter stitch gauge. I think the gauge given on the pattern was, I want to say 4 or 5 stitches per inch. I'll have to go back and look. I chose to knit it with different gauge and different needles than what the pattern called for. But when I did that, I did so intentionally, and I knew that that would make a denser fabric than what the pattern called for. And I knew that I would need more yarn consequently. And that was okay with me because it made the fabric that I wanted to have for the shawl. I liked the way it felt. I liked the squishiness of it. And so that was a choice that I made, knowing I would need more yarn to complete the project and do more repeats to make the size of garment that I wanted. Okay, Mandy says she's looking for a clear video for 2 at a time cuff down socks. That might have to be in the future knit along. I haven't done one of those yet, but I would like to. The Tangled Cat asks, how much time do you spend knitting in a typical day? I can usually fit in an hour or two. Okay, an hour or two, she says. More than that. I usually knit, I don't know, probably, I'm conservatively going to say 2 to 3 hours a day, maybe more, depends on the day, but typically probably 2 or 3 hours a day. I think I've gotten faster in the last few years just with practice, and I'm kind of trying to adjust my technique so I'm a little bit quicker on those, you know, super cruisy sections of a project where I'm just garter stitch knitting or a sock that's just plain vanilla or something super easy. Probably more if I stay up or I have a good movie. But I probably don't sleep as much as I should. In the winter, I find that I have a little bit more time to knit. Right now, you know, with all the farm stuff in the summer and the garden and all the things going on, I'm knitting a little bit less than I was during the winter. But typically probably 3-ish hours. Depends on how much sleep I'm not getting. The next question comes from the YouTube channel, and it's from Bullshoy1959. When you do Judy's Magic Cast On, you knit in an anti-clockwise direction to start off. Do you continue until you have finished the increases? Okay, so counterclockwise. I'll have to go back and look at my own video, but I don't think so. I think I'm still knitting clockwise as you normally would. Let me go back and check, but I'm pretty sure I knit clockwise. because I'm going across the first needle and then back over. Yeah, I'm knitting clockwise, so I'm not sure if it appears differently for some reason when I upload the video. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at that. I apologize if that's confusing. And then the second portion of the question is also, I think you still knit the heel flap first when knitting toe up. Yes, I do. On the customizable toe up video series, I do knit the heel flap first, and I've just basically flipped the heel. So I knit the heel flap first, I do the gussets and everything exactly. I turn the heel and I knit the gusset decreases exactly the same way as I do when I knit cuff down. Could you also do that again before starting the leg? What I do on the customizable toe up is I knit the toe and the leg, and then I knit the heel flap. I turn the heel, and then I pick up the stitches in the same way I always do, and then I decrease the gussets in the same way that I do with a cuff down sock. It's just that I've turned it on its head, basically. Okay, so I apologize if that's not super clear. Drop me a comment, Bullshoy1959, drop me a comment if I've misunderstood you. Okay. Martin Kids asks, what did knitting look like for settlers or other people long ago? What are the most common items knitted in those time periods? Everything. I mean, back in the time of settlers, certainly in the pioneer times, and well, even way back, people that were knitting and knitting for production, they were either knitting, you know, for production for items to sell, so they had to be super fast or they wouldn't make any money, or they had to certainly be faster than me. That's why, like, Stephanie Pearl McPhee talks about the Irish cottage knitters, you know, where they do the armpit knitting and they have their knitting needle pushed under here and they use their wrist in a similar way to a sewing machine, and they're just super fast. Look that up. Look up Hazel Tindel on YouTube. She's like lightning fast. So they had to knit for, you know, production to make money, to knit things to sell. And also, obviously, they knitted their own socks and shawls and hats, and they knitted their own clothing. I mean, they had to. So common items, I'm not sure, in those time periods, obviously was pretty much everything you couldn't buy at the store. I mean, I've seen pictures of knitted knickers and knitted, I think, anything other than underclothing possibly, but most everything had to be, and maybe not pants necessarily, but yeah, pretty much everything. Or I came, I saw, I napped says, how long does it take you to knit a pair of socks, assuming that that's the only thing you're working on? I am capable of doing a pair of socks in 4 days if that's a lot of knitting and not a lot of sleeping. And, you know, no dinner making or anything else. And everyone leaves me alone. Then, yeah. And that's in the winter when there's not all the, right. I have knitted a pair of socks in 4 days. That was actually for a competition. It was called Sock Wars. It was like a game, and you had to knit a pair of socks to someone else's specification and then mail it off to them. And then when they received your package, they had been assassinated. And then that meant if they weren't done knitting the socks for their target, they would send that pair of unfinished socks to you, or me in that case, to finish, to mail to their target. So the last knitter standing wins. So that'd be a fun thing to do in the group if anybody is interested. It was crazy and super fun. Joanne says, I'm making a shawl with alternating sections of MCN fingering and mohair. MCN stands for, viewers, if you don't know, that stands for merino cashmere nylon blend. And mohair. Do you recommend completely submerging the shawl and blocking, or just spritz and block? Okay, I do not have a lot of experience with mohair, but what I would spritz it and block it. I don't know that I would dunk it. On the other hand, there's other things I've read where people have, and I would probably err on the side of caution there. Do a little Googling, and just spritz it and see if that works. I don't have a lot of experience with just straight up mohair that's not blended with other things. So sorry, I'm not the authority on that. I would suggest a Google. If you have an answer to anybody's question, feel free to chime in and answer and give your opinion in the comments down below. The other thing I'm excited to tell you about is registration is open for the fall retreat. This is our first ever Purl Together retreat. This will be held the first weekend in October in beautiful downtown Ogden, Utah. A lovely time of year to be there. It'll be fantastic. All the fall colors will be out. So we'll spend 2 full days knitting together. So if you're interested in the details there, click the link down below in the video description. I'd love to meet you there. And thanks again for watching and supporting Purl Together.